Okay.
Not God.
All right. I see the numbers going up.
Mhm.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome on in. Welcome, welcome. We'll begin shortly. Thank you for joining us at the Safer Births Now virtual conference. Before we begin, let's just take a few quick reminders. Questions for the speaker can be added to the chat or the Q&A function throughout the session. We'll address as many as possible during the Q&A session or at the speaker's convenience. While we are waiting for the credits to roll, how about you all, if you can share where you're from, where are you hailing from? I know we have folks from all over the country. I'm hailing from New York City. Queens specifically is my location currently. Where is everyone else from? Dawn, I see you from Dawn. Philly. What's up, Philly? Who else we have in here? Let's see. That's it. Hot Arizona. It became winter all of a sudden here in New York City. We had spring and now it's like 30 degrees. Well, today, right now it's 41. Illinois is in the house. Pittsburgh, Seattle. That's a long way from New York City for sure. California transplant from New York. Oh, we miss you. DC and Kansas City is in the building. Born and raised in Jamaica, Queens. I'm living in Jamaica, Queens right now. Currently residing in Frederick, Maryland. Awesome. Welcome, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for being here. All right. So, if the credits are complete, I would like to welcome you all to our programming for this evening. My name is Amina, and I will be moderating today's session titled Slay Your Anxiety, Calm and Confident from Pregnancy to Postpartum. The Safer Birth Now conference brings together clinicians, researchers, innovators, parents, and their loved ones, and advocates from around the country with a shared goal: improving outcomes for Black mamas and newborns. And we're excited to have you join us for this discussion. I want to start by saying that I feel so passionate about conversations like this because pregnancy and postpartum are such powerful, transformative seasons, yet they can also be emotionally intense, overwhelming, and at times incredibly anxiety provoking. My why in this work comes from both my professional experience and my heart for supporting mothers and birthing people in ways that feel grounded, affirming, and real. And too often, people are told how they should feel during pregnancy, but not always given enough space to talk honestly about fear, racing thoughts, emotional overload, or the pressure to just hold everything together. And for Black birthing people, especially, those experiences can be layered with very real concerns around safety, advocacy, stress, and being properly supported. So, my hope for tonight is that this conversation feels like a breath of fresh air, a space where people can feel informed, validated, and reminded that anxiety is not a personal failure. It is something that can be understood, supported, and navigated with care. And I'm so excited for what we'll learn together tonight. But before we begin, I want to invite everyone to take a breath with me. Inhale and exhale, and just allow yourself to arrive fully in this space. But before we jump in, just a few quick notes. This is intended to be a supportive and educational space. Please feel free to engage in the chat respectfully. We welcome your reflections and questions throughout the webinar. And while tonight's discussion is educational and supportive, it is not a substitute for individual therapy, medical care, or crisis support. So if anything shared tonight feels personally activating, please feel free to step away, take a breath, get some water, or return when you're ready. We invite you to take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and honor your own emotional needs throughout our time together. So let me introduce you to our speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Alicia Hodge. Dr. Hodge is a psychologist and wellness innovator whose work centers emotional wellness, healing, and practical support for people navigating life's challenges. Dr. Hodge received her doctorate in psychology from the University of Hartford, and she holds her master's in counseling psychology from Bowie State University. With a virtual practice serving over 40 states and a decade of clinical corporate experience, Dr. Hodge has become a trusted voice on anxiety and burnout. And she teaches practical tools that go beyond performing wellness and build capacity in real time. We are so grateful to have someone with her depth of expertise and compassionate lens join us for this important discussion. Tonight, Dr. Hodge will help us better understand what anxiety can look like during pregnancy and postpartum, how it can show up emotionally and physically, what is normal versus when to seek additional support, and practical tools that can help birthing people feel more grounded, more informed, and empowered. Dr. Hodge, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We are excited to learn from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I also echo your sentiments that this is a very important conversation, and I think hopefully tonight we can have a better perspective on understanding our own expectations and what Um, I like what you said earlier that anxiety is very much can be a natural and normal experience. So, us having the opportunity to talk here about what the purpose of anxiety is and how it can serve you, and what to do when we notice that maybe it's becoming more overwhelming. And I do have some slides that I want to share, so I'm going to share my screen. It seems like every time you get on PowerPoint, it's like you've never done it before. Okay, so um, as was shared, this is the title of our evening. I just want to start off. I like to use some statistics just to get us an idea, a sense of like what's the context for this. And so, one of the things I like to say is that pregnancy itself may not be creating anxiety, but it very much can be an amplification of the things that we naturally need to notice, but that we may tend to begin to worry about. And so the data does show us that 1 in 5 mothers does experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. And about 40% of pregnant people do report experiencing significant anxiety. So this is a topic that affects many people. And oftentimes we don't want to be in the number, but I also find that sometimes knowing that this number is large can be comforting and understanding that anxiety is very approachable and very treatable. And I like to make it sound straightforward, although I know it can be a difficult experience. I think when we have an understanding of what's going on, we may feel better equipped to work with it. And so, unfortunately, the piece that is very much more concerning is that 75% of cases can go unrecognized or untreated. And the reason why this happens is that maybe some of the things that Amina was sharing earlier, that people may not want to ask for help. They may tell themselves, like, this is normal, I just have to deal with this. And so we want to understand today what is more normative and what is not. And so I think it's important for us to understand, how does anxiety look? Oftentimes, when you think about movies or television, anxiety is represented as something that I would describe as very dramatic. We may notice things like a significant body experience, and typically anxiety is only represented as a panic attack, but anxiety can be much more of a lower experience. And so, for example, if you're experiencing something like spiraling thoughts, and this means that you may find yourself almost like a hiccup stuck on one or several related worries over and over that then expand on themselves. What if I'm not ready in time? Do I have everything I need? Spiraling thoughts also may be attached with a behavior. Oftentimes, I see in pregnant people or new parents that is in the form of Googling. So many times, someone will notice that their thoughts are growing and they're spiraling, and now they're searching and checking. Another sign of how anxiety can look is having maybe a disconnected sense, not feeling perhaps excited, or not feeling like what you should when other people are sharing. Now, I am very careful with the word should. Because oftentimes should reflect someone's rule or opinion. And so I'm not implying that you should feel all of the traditional ways or the ways that people tell you that you ought to. But if you're noticing this is not typical of me, I'm typically more connected or invested emotionally in things. And in this case, I'm noticing that my inclination is to detach. You may notice a behavior of being more silent or blanking out. So this can happen, for example, in appointments. You may go to an appointment and just feel a little silenced or dampened down, really nervous about asking questions or not knowing the right things. You may blank out or feel like I did have some questions or some things that I wanted to talk about, but they're not coming to me anymore, and I feel really on edge. Another type of way that anxiety can manifest itself is in perfectionism. And now this sometimes becomes complicated because most people operating in perfectionism would say, well, I'm not perfect. That doesn't apply to me. But in reality, this is the mindset that everything needs to be figured out first. I need to have all my ducks in a row before I can even maybe execute or get started on something. And this may be related to something like your birth plan. This may be related to setting up some initial things in the home for when you're ready to accept and bring the baby home. Another physical manifestation is constantly feeling on edge. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that outside of our individual selves, there are a lot of things going on in the world right now in which we feel really unsettled and uncomfortable. So noting that anxiety can be coming from different sources and different places, but I do express that when people are feeling constantly on edge, even if they have a sentiment of things are okay or things are taken care of, things are in place, they're still feeling very much unable to rest or relax. Another area that anxiety often shows up, and people are less likely to catch on, are sleep difficulties. And so, anxiety can present itself as a significant restlessness. Our bodies may be very, very tired. However, our mind is very actively awake and unable to power down in the evenings. And so, these are some of the smaller ways that anxiety can exist. I do, of course, recognize that there are the standard stereotypical symptoms of anxiety, things like shortness of breath, um, extreme muscle tension, particularly usually in the neck and shoulder area. People may find that they have a lot of stomach upset, but I find that when we're talking more about pregnancy and postpartum, these are the ways that anxiety show up, and they can look a bit adjacent to normal behavior. So, for example, it is very common and typical of a new parent to have some worries. However, if you notice that these worries are significantly distressing you, and you're maybe over anchored in the idea that they may be actually very much true, that looks more like it has an anxious tone to it. And so I do want to level set on what anxiety is. and how it exists within us. So it's very important to know that anxiety is one of our natural and normal emotions. Anxiety is meant to inspire you to action. So, for example, if we think of things like, oh, I almost forgot, tomorrow is a loved one's birthday, I'm going to move to action and remember to make a reservation or purchase a gift or set a reminder to send a phone call to them tomorrow. And so we do need anxiety to be on alert. We do need anxiety to detect and protect us from danger. However, there are certain things that happen during pregnancy, um, particularly in the mother's brain, but also in parents, is observed that your brain undergoes some changes and modifications that are meant to adapt and accommodate you to have a new baby in your life. So it's important to note that our brain is trained everyone's brain is trained to constantly scan for threat. You need to look out for the drop in the street so that you don't fall. You need to kind of determine how fast is that car coming before I cross so that I don't get injured. And so, as you can imagine, when you have a child who is dependent on you in life, your brain is now stretched. And we do see that the area of the brain that is responsible for fear does increase during pregnancy. And so you may become more fearful. You may be looking for more threats. And so it is important to understand that your nervous system has changed and is in fact elevated. And being a little bit more cautious as a new parent is not abnormal. Also, in addition to that, pregnancy hormones do turn up sensitivity levels. And so again, this increases not only the idea of physical threat, but even emotional threat. A mother may be more sensitive to criticism, to negativity. And so, birth in and of itself will reset a person's nervous system. And what we know about our nervous system is that it is trained typically for three states in response. And what I mean by those are fight, flight, or freeze. You may have heard those before. And so, fight is when you want to defend off for something, flight is when you want to separate, freeze is, of course, staying in place. That makes sense if there's particularly like a lion coming. We all understand what fight, flight, or freeze would look like. However, how does that look in our modern day world? And so, fight may look like someone being much more defensive or lashing out or argumentative. Of course, maybe physically fighting. And because their stress response is indicating that I'm more than likely overwhelmed and I need to repel things from me. When someone is in a flight mode, this person may be more withdrawn, avoidant. They may not want to talk about certain things, think about certain things, approach particular situations, may not feel comfortable attending appointments, may not feel comfortable about the topics of new baby or the responsibilities that may change. And of course, we also have freeze. And this may look like someone who is poised, but also maybe ambivalent. They may be less prone to taking action, a bit more passive in the planning process, maybe allowing or hoping that other people more so step in to aid in the care of the new baby. And none of these responses are wrong. I like to really emphasize this idea that our bodies are naturally doing the things that they're supposed to do, and we may need to step in with some skills to help maintain and calm our nervous system. And so when we have an activated stress response, that is when we notice symptoms like a racing heart, shallow breath. You may feel your extremities tingle, like your fingers or your toes. You may note that your stomach has distress, difficulty eating, or even in pain, unfortunately. And we would want to consistently work towards or align ourselves with a more regulated nervous state. There are so many benefits to a regulated nervous state, from health benefits to also co-regulation with your new baby or even unborn baby, just allowing for a more ideal physical state. And so this is evidenced by things like slower breath. You notice that you're more present. You can access your five senses. You have clearer thinking, and you have this idea and the sentiment that I am connected. And so this is very learnable. When we are in an activated stress response, it can be very difficult to think and plan. This is when we see worries start to proliferate. because it's very difficult to maybe access some of the planning and the executive functioning skills that come along with a more regulated nervous state that enhances our curiosity and problem solving. And so, some quick ways that we can easily steady our nervous system, because I think what I want to share is that in some ways, capitalism has promoted this idea that the only way to relax is to go on a vacation or do excessive self-care. And in many ways, I find that steadying your nervous system can be accessed strictly through breath, which is free and accessible to all of us. We just need a moment. And so you don't need to first think your way out. When your body is activated, you can simply breathe first. And this is something that is promoted right throughout the entire pregnancy and especially the birth process. Being able to breathe sends a message back up to our brain that we are safe and that it is okay. And so, one of the techniques that I like to use is called square breathing. And if you think about it, it's called square breathing because you are meant to visualize a square. And so, wherever you are, you can just sit in the chair or stand up and just ground yourself. And when I say that, it means think about, feel your weight on the floor, feel your body and its presence. You can close your eyes if that works for you. And you want to take in a deep inhale through your nose. And you do that for 4 counts. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then hold again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you keep repeating that cycle over and over. You can draw a square in your mind. You can do it physically with your hand. You can do it with your breath. But this is a way to quickly reset your body. Our breath is very, very powerful. It allows our body to calm down and access, again, that part of our brain that will help us problem solve and even think through some of the things that can be useful to us. The second thing that I would recommend is something called grounding. Grounding exists of 5 points. I typically tell people if you could think of your hand, you could think of grounding using your five senses. So this is a time where if I'm sitting and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do about childcare, daycare signups? I'll be transparent. In DC, daycare signups were you needed to sign up, the day you found out you were pregnant. And so I would have these thoughts of like, oh my gosh, when am I going to be able to sign up for daycare? What if there's no spots? What am I going to do? How am I going to go back to work? Grounding in that moment would be me saying, okay, I want to step out of this loop. Typically, we notice after we've been in it. And so it's not important or useful to even criticize yourself and notice that you have spiraled into a thought. It's shaking it off and realizing there's something I can do now. And so you would think about your senses. What are some things in this room that I can see? The floor, a lamp, a door, a water bottle. What are some things maybe that I can touch? I encourage people to rub their hands together. You can use scented lotion that'll engage two senses. You can do a butterfly hug if anyone is familiar with that. It activates both sides of your brain and it helps you calm down. Think about some things that you can hear. You can actually even go for some calming music if you like, other sounds that are soothing to you, things that you can smell. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you might try scented lotion. Also things that you can taste. And so that can be something as simple as a mint. But I think if you are seeking out to engage your senses, you automatically end up grounded because you have to be in the present to experience and engage your senses. I did see a message in the chat. Let's see if I can access that. Yes. And so thank you for enjoying the breathing technique. I'm happy that I did make that point about self-care not being aligned with only using your resources because while those things are also pleasant, I think it's also important to note that we can really access and soothe ourselves, and those added things can be treats or enhancements to self-care, but self-care is simply intentionally taking care of yourself in a way that feels good to you, in a way that feels comfortable, and it can range from 5 minutes to 5 whole days. Sensory thing, you can just go down a line and come back up. And so the other way that we can interrupt and disrupt anxiety is doing some problem solving. And so essentially, I wanted to teach the idea of how do I deactivate myself physically before I jump into the intellectual realm. And so worrying, I simply like to categorize worry as an unproductive problem solving attempt. This way, we don't have to put any judgment on it. We don't have to say, like, oh, so silly, I'm worrying for no reason. The reason you're worrying is that it's almost like you're just stuck in a little bit of a loop. Your brain is bringing up a problem to you, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, how can I address this worry or this problem? And then ultimately you get stuck and you kind of fall back into the worry. And so there are certain types of errors or thinking errors that I like to highlight that we can try to shy away from. It is helpful in the beginning before you jump into changing your thoughts to just observe them and notice them. Do I have a pattern? Do I have a theme? Do I typically do some of these? And if so, what could I do differently? So there's about four categories that I want to bring up today. There, in research, there's about 12, but there's no need to memorize all of those. And so if someone notices that their thoughts are typically characterized with this what if tone, like what if something goes wrong? What if I don't do it right? That may fall under the label of catastrophizing. And as it sounds, catastrophizing implies that my thinking is very catastrophic. It ends in something fairly dangerous or, um, something that I'm dreading. And so, what you can do to neutralize that style is to think about how can I stay in the here and now? What is actually true? So instead of what if, ask yourself what is. So, what if something goes wrong? uh, and in this case I'm saying are, but like what are they telling me? What do I know? What is true? Things have been okay so far. Yes, I've had some sickness, but there is a chance that it will resolve. And so what's true right now is I'm doing my best to take care of myself and manage. Another area is should statements. I mentioned that earlier. I often joke that should is the S word in my practice when I'm working with people because should sort of already implies or imparts a rule onto you. You're sort of telling yourself, I should be feeling this way. It should be this, it should be going this way. Should. You're backing yourself into a corner. And so, in some ways, if you just want to modify your language, you can change a should for a could. I could feel happier. That might be true. But it doesn't imply that I should be judged or maybe punished for what's going on with me now. It's very important to have self-compassion, especially in this state. I'm a huge fan of self-compassion almost at all times because ultimately the world is judging you and criticizing you in many ways and through a lot of messaging. And the strongest voice, I believe, is our own. And so I'm a big fan of applying self-compassion to myself. Ask yourself, who's the nicest person or the most generous person, sweetest person to me? What would they say? And they might offer an alternative. And so if you find yourself being very black or white, saying like, I'm already failing, I'm not doing great at this parenting thing, I'm messed up, remind yourself a lot of this. Even if it's not your first time around as a parent, it's your first time around doing it this time. And that was something that was very important, even as I went through my motherhood journey, to remind myself, maybe I went to school and I have a doctorate, but I don't have a doctorate in being a mom this time around, or this specific pregnancy, or with this child. And so understanding that it wasn't black and white and looking for the gray to say, oh, I didn't really know that answer, but thankfully I was able to find out, or I may not get the schedule Uh-oh. I
We
don't know what
lost
happened to
you.
our. It was me? Okay. Oh my goodness.
You froze for a few minutes, not too long. I would say 30
Uh-oh.
seconds, less than a minute. You were
Oh my
frozen.
goodness. I was on a roll too. I'm so sorry. What was the last thing that I said? I want to make sure I didn't skip over anything important.
You didn't miss too much. It was just for us about 30 seconds or so that was
Okay.
missed.
Okay. Did you hear about, I made a statement about managing expectations and motherhood, like every day, what the expectation could be,
Mm-hmm.
just keeping your baby safe. Okay.
Yes,
All right.
that.
Thank you. Technical difficulties. I'm gonna go back to sharing this PowerPoint slide. Is that good for everyone?
Yes.
Okay. We're back as if it never happened. And so I think that was a perfect example of how you can be flexible and display some flexible thinking because ultimately, right, like when we talk about these thinking errors, if I told myself, oh, I failed, the presentation was horrible, it's ruined. Ultimately, it would ruin the rest of my experience and your experience. But technical difficulties happen. And so we want to do things like avoid comparison and avoid this strategy in which maybe we're looking at other people and acknowledge like I may not have the entire picture of what's happening with other parents, I do think is important to have an expanded social circle or at least a trusted person that you can check in with to level set around the motherhood or parenting experience. Um, I also think it's important to ask yourself, what would I tell a friend? We are oftentimes able to access a lot of self-compassion for others when we may find it difficult for ourselves. And so if we catch yourself attending to your own voice and your own criticisms, remind yourself it may be more beneficial to think, what would I tell a friend? And we may find a much more, again, neutral, supportive voice for us to absorb. Another area that I work a lot in is in the area of perfectionism. And I think I shared earlier that oftentimes when I use the word perfectionism, most people think, okay, this doesn't apply to me because I am not in any way operating as perfect. And what happens, I believe, is that in a sneaky way, perfectionism is not actually a person who is perfect in maintaining it. It is a person that has set an exceedingly high standard in a manner that even if they meet it, they will then typically expand the standard. And so it is very difficult to meet your own expectation. It can be very difficult for others to meet your expectation. And while it is typically good intentioned, it may have the blowback of feeling not enough. It may also really have the blowback of feeling tense and constantly on and running and even anxious about the idea that you're not meeting your own expectations. And so you want to pay attention to this voice. And I refer to that as just like an internal dialogue or this thought, this idea that I have to have it all figured out. And I think the compassion is key here because the reality of it is it is very difficult to figure out something that you have not done before. And that is not necessarily how we want to enter into new things. We want to enter in with a growth mindset and an idea that there's opportunity at times in the difficulty. Another perfectionistic voice that can show up is this idea of I shouldn't need help. Again, that's the should, the word that I said that we want to reconsider. I believe actually that I would dispel that you very much should and ought to need help. I believe that pregnancy and parenting is a large responsibility and opportunity, and it is one that is much more profitable when shared. And so, yes, taking care of another human being does in fact require help. And if you need help, that is not an indictment against you. I've also heard things like good moms don't struggle. And I believe that is actually also false. I believe that good moms acknowledge their limitations, and I believe that good moms put forth their best effort, but also can benefit and very much need additional support. And then, last but not least, you may struggle with rest, and rest may feel unsafe, or you have an inability to relax because you have this running script of I really need to finish XYZ before I rest. In this instance, rest very much becomes conditional, which I believe is very, I'll use this word, dangerous when it comes to pregnancy and parenting, early parenting, because rest is a very crucial element of the equation in growing a strong, healthy baby and preparing yourself to receive a baby home, if not through biological means. The energy that you will need to even endure those early nights potentially without sleep. And so we don't want to make rest conditional that I only get rest as a reward. I'm only worthy of rest um, after output, because what happens is you will progressively output without any input, which leads us to burnout and exhaustion. And can exacerbate things like postpartum anxiety or depression, which we want to really support and help prevent, if not manage it. And so I would encourage you to ask yourself instead, what is this standard costing me? Do I have to show up as the most educated and prepared parent? Do I need to know everything? Do I need to follow, whatever book it is that I read, point by point? And so recognizing that if the standard is causing exhaustion or resentment or disconnection, then the standard is not working for you. And we can ultimately revise it. You do have that power. Also, um, I often imply or assert the concept of good enough. Good enough is probably something that does not sound that great. But in psychology, there's a lot of research around the idea of good enough. And so, a running joke that I have with my colleagues and peers when people ask, especially in stressful times, like, how are things going? We typically say good enough. And what that relates to is research around parenting. And it's the idea that the good enough mother does not need to engage with their child 100% of the time. And that sounds like, oh, what a relief, what a shock, because in theory, it's actually difficult to engage 100% of the time. We just need to meet a threshold. We just need to be good enough. We just need to be engaged about, I'll say 38% of the time in certain experiences, because this scenario, this experience does not require 100% of us. And again, while that may seem unconventional, I hope that it actually serves as a relief that you only have to establish an expectation of being good enough. And that's sort of what I was referring to in the previous slide when I said my standard, my checkbox of the day was, did I keep my child healthy and safe today? And if the answer was yes, I didn't have to mark off anything else, any activities, anything else performative. And so the idea is that you want to exist and be human and be good enough. Another important question to ask yourself is, what do I need right now? What do I need right now? Not what is mapped out and laid out. What looks good? Do I have steps A through Z mapped out? Can I just have A? Can I just have maybe A and B and allow myself to exist in the moment? And so, what I do think is important is to understand when it may be time to get more support. And so, I know that we've briefly gone over some of the ways that anxiety can show up and be concerning or limiting. But the idea that I always like to promote as well is that trust yourself. You know yourself oftentimes at the time period when someone is seeking support. As a provider, I'm often aware that they maybe have been enduring something a bit longer than they might have needed to. So if you do not feel like yourself, whatever that means for yourself, that isn't that to me as an indication that it can become time to start exploring supports versus waiting until things are really bad. You deserve to be supported at any stage. And so the tools that we provided related to breathing, and I do also want to share some other little hacks to pursue joy. That I'm aware that they also have limits. And so it's also important to recognize that I may need some more support. And these are some things that you can speak to your doctor about or seek out a clinician. There are people who do specialize in maternal mental health. I think that they are great resources. And equally, you can seek out other types of providers and do consultations to find out if you're a best fit. And so, if you're noticing that anxiety is significantly disrupting your sleep, for not just a few evenings, but multiple evenings, eating in a way, in a manner that is causing fluctuation in your weight or severely interrupting and disrupting your day, then that might be a sign. There are some reputable quizzes online that you can take regarding postpartum depression and anxiety that will then point you in the direction of resources. If you notice that you're having persistent, intrusive, or scary thoughts about yourself or your baby, that can be something that you can touch base. Your OBGYN or PCP might be a great first stop, just to sort of check in on the validity or the intensity. I do want to normalize that it is common to have intrusive or scary thoughts, meaning about harm or injury to your baby. I myself experienced that. However, if we're noticing like a frequency and persistence or a severe magnitude, that may be an opportunity for you to check in. If you notice that you're feeling significantly detached from your baby or yourself in a way that you can't engage in the care to support yourself or your baby, enduring more than about a week or so, especially um, after birth, we typically like to observe someone for a week or two, but if it's persisting, I would encourage you to speak with someone. Equally persistent sadness or numbness. And so there is a period postpartum in which someone might experience something called the baby blues, in which there's a significant adjustment in an emotional state. But again, being in touch and supported by your loved ones is also really useful and them giving you some observations about what they're noticing. And as always, if anyone is ever experiencing thoughts of harming themselves or others, I do encourage them to reach out for support. Again, this is something that a phenomenon that can be fleeting and occur, but I always want people to have supports in place. I have listed some resources that you can use. Therapy for Black Girls, that is a therapist directory that I utilize, and so that's why I suggested it. But there's also Psychology Today, which is sort of the more generic platform. You don't have to be a Black girl only to use it. That's just the name that it was created under. There's also a crisis text line if you feel as though at any point you really need some urgent communication, you can reach out and text to that. And something that I didn't get an opportunity to go back to is that one of the things when we're talking about being steady in our nervous system and grounded, you can also facilitate that. One of the things I like to encourage people to do is have digital support. It looks like my slide possibly got deleted, so we'll just talk about it verbally. And so the phones are not always our best friend. I'm aware of that. The phones can exacerbate anxiety if we're up late at night, if we're Googling, as I mentioned. If you find yourself reaching for your phone to soothe your anxiety, there are some ways that you can ground yourself on your phone. One is I encourage people, if you're into social media, start a social media account in which the algorithm only features things that you enjoy. Positivity, it can be things about babies. I wouldn't encourage you to follow like the medical accounts with all the facts and maybe sobering things, but more so babies laughing. Things about parenting, animals, science, whatever pleases you, music, visual things, but create an account in which the algorithm really nourishes you and restores you and feeds you and gives you an opportunity to scroll without being activated. We want you to scroll and be less activated. I also encourage people to make something that I call a glimmer album, which means go into your current existing photos. Maybe they're photos of your pregnancy, of your newborn, and make an album of moments. It can be video clips and photos, but things that make it more restorative than activating. And so my takeaways, because I do want to give time for some discussion or Q&A. It is important to know that anxiety in pregnancy and postpartum is common. And it's real and it's treatable. And so I think oftentimes people around us may be quick to soothe us, but it may feel dismissive. And so people may say things like, don't worry about that. That doesn't matter. Um, and while that may be their attempt to soothe you, it may matter. And our brains oftentimes do a good job of bringing something up again when it believes it's important. And so sometimes our anxiety may be in proportion to the fact that this pregnancy and our postpartum experience really matters to us. And so instead of being critical to yourself, just acknowledge my baby is very important and this is why it is top of mind. But here are some of the ways that I can hopefully manage this anxiety and remind myself or ground myself in reality. Um, Biologically, your nervous system is in fact reacting to new changes. And so, what may feel a bit lofty or silly may actually be the result of new changes in your brain scanning and getting you more aware, unfortunately, of threats. But in some ways, you can paradoxically say, I'm a warrior now. I am constantly able to manage threats. And that in theory means that I will be keeping my baby very safe. Remembering the takeaway of to breathe first and think second. Oftentimes, we want to rush into the intellectual and problem solve, when in reality, we can do a lot of work by calming our bodies and our brain first. Overall, the idea that you're allowed to take up space, being very careful not to minimize or shrink yourself based on your expectations or the limiting beliefs that others have shared with you. This is an important time, and you are absolutely allowed to fully experience it and take up space, ask questions, and ask for support. And the biggest takeaway that I like to share is that good enough is enough. I think that the majority of people that I encounter that are experiencing maybe some tension or anxiety around the pregnancy or postpartum experience are already excelling in doing the things that they need to do. And I always say that a good parent is a parent that's worried about parenting. There's no quote unquote bad parent that is worried about parenting. And so if you are worried, you are probably in fact operating and doing good enough and recognizing that you are enough and will be enough and taking it one day at a time. If I didn't
Amen.
get a chance to look at the comments. I don't know if there were any that came up
Yeah,
while I
thank
was
you,
speaking.
Dr. Hodge, for that insightful presentation. We can transition to the
Okay.
Q&A. I did notice one question that came up from Tanya. Tanya wanted to know, actually, she brought up a really practical question in the Q&A. Will any breathing activity work when someone is feeling anxious, or could there be certain types of breathing techniques that tend to be more helpful during pregnancy or postpartum?
That's a good question. So I would promote yes, any type of breathing. Um, when it comes to anxiety, I really focus on the exhale. I know a lot of times we're like deep breath and yes, we're getting as much air, but really the exhale is where the biological change happens and you can actually expel some stress and bring a lot more calm to you. And so, really, the duration is more important. I would encourage somebody to try to engage in breathing from 3 to 5 minutes if it's available to them. That's where you really see a change. But honestly, if you think you're deep breathing, go a little deeper. Most of us think it's deep. You really want to focus on your belly
Mhm.
rising and being filled with air as much as possible.
Thank you. We have Chantel in the chat, and thank you, Tanya, for that question. Chantel wants to know, how long can the postpartum period last? She says she's had postpartum depression with her kids. She's a mom of two, 3 and 6 years old. She doesn't have a lot of family support, and she finds herself stressed all over again as if they are two or under again. Um, Long story
Mm.
short, she says that due to working, lack of support, and stress, she finds herself breaking out, hair thinning bad, more frequent headaches, and always yawning and tired. how long does this postpartum period last?
That's actually a really good question. And so if I were looking to name it in terms of evaluation, and feel free to correct me, Amina, what I have seen is that the postpartum period for depression can last slightly past the 1 year mark. That being said, depression, that label can extend itself. And based off of some of the things that you're sharing with me around the lack of support and feeling stressed, that those are exacerbating terms, right? To not necessarily feel as though you have the resources. And so we may not say, label it as this is specifically postpartum depression, but it is an episode or a mood that is exacerbated by your circumstances. And so, wholeheartedly, I'm sorry to hear about the lack of support because, as I said earlier, all parents need support. It's not just good moms that make it by without needing any resources. Um, it sounds to me that the stress level is contributing to some of the things that you're mentioning. Sometimes we see stress impact us physically, like our mood and our weight. Um, I don't know what your ability to find more support is, but it does sound to me that that's the thing that is making the postpartum period feel more extended, meaning like our kids do gain independence with age. So I think I hear what you're saying is my kids are 3 and 6, but it's feeling like they're 2 because that I'm not feeling sort of like this progressive independence or maybe having less caregiving.
Yeah. I've heard some people say that postpartum is forever, right? Postpartum is forever. And
Yes,
Dr. Leslie mentioned in the chat that if left untreated, anxiety can then turn into depression. Is it possible
yes,
for someone to have be experiencing depression and anxiety at the same time?
yes, absolutely. And so, yes, that is a true statement. Left untreated, anxiety can develop sort of like a secondary, is what we typically call a secondary. Depression is secondary to the anxiety because of the impact of the anxiety. It then leads to depression, whether that is because things are difficult or certain areas are not, you're not functioning well, or overall assessment that I'm not functioning well. But yes, we can absolutely experience both at the same time. They may play off of each other for lack of a better term, but additionally, they may exist separately of each other. I think it's important to acknowledge that too. And so I know that we are focusing on parents. And so when we use specifiers like postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, we're indicating that that experience is related to the parenting. But someone can also absolutely be experiencing depression that is not related to their child after giving birth. And so I think I want to make that clear that you can have changes in your mood and they don't have to be only related to the child.
Hmm. And and it's true that you can develop anxiety during your pregnancy, even if you've never experienced heightened anxiety and depression prior to. Yeah. We have a question from Clarence. I see you, Clarence. Clarence wants to know, in what ways can dads, fathers, and or male caregivers be supportive during this time and space? I really like this question because as a culture, as a society, we do need to do so
Yeah.
much more work in inviting dads into the birthing space. Thank you for that question, Clarence.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, one of the things that I said, and hopefully I did not speed over it fast, is that these impact parents as a whole. I did reference mothers often, but I also have done groups and have had dads come in indicating that I am experiencing these things. I am having anxiety. I am struggling within the transition. And so I want to acknowledge that the symptoms actually are very much the same and similar. They may be related to anxiety around the care of the child. One of the things that I also like to encourage parents is to engage in skills-based learning because oftentimes anxiety can be quelled when there might be a skills deficit. And what I mean by that is if you are a first-time parent, and even again, second, third-time parent, because things change, um, feeling as though some of the what ifs or the areas that you may not feel skilled are actually met with reality of skill. Um, and I just say that as like a basic, tangible way to approach some of the that anxiety, but also in the ways that men can support. I think was a part of what you had shared was engaging in these discussions together. I think oftentimes there's less room for men in this space, or for dads and fathers and male caregivers, in the sense of they may not be checked on as well. And so I believe that it is really beneficial to A, express oneself, even if you have not done it in the past, but B, check in as well on partners and new parents, because silence or less expression doesn't indicate that someone might not be having the same distress.
So very true. Thank you for that response. And it seems we are at the end of our program time. Thank you so much, Dr. Hodge, for sharing your wisdom, your
Thank
expertise, and
you.
such thoughtful, compassionate insight with us tonight. And thank you to everyone who joined us and created space for this conversation. Anxiety during pregnancy and postpartum is real, and I hope tonight helped to normalize that every experience um, that support is available, is healing, and you do not have to navigate this alone. If there's one thing that I hope everyone takes away tonight, it's that experiencing anxiety does not mean you are failing, does not mean that you are weak or doing motherhood wrong. It means that you are human and you deserve care too. So please continue to be gentle with yourselves, check in with your emotional needs, and reach for support when you need it. Thank you all again for being here, and may you leave tonight feeling a little more informed, a little more grounded, and a lot less alone. So there are some sponsor acknowledgments to go through. I guess I'll run through those. The Safer Births Now virtual conference is made possible through the support of our title sponsors and program partners whose commitment helps advance safer maternal and newborn care. We extend our sincere thanks to our title sponsors, Birthing the Magic Collaborative, Black Coalition for Safe Motherhood, Transitions, Women's Health Consulting, LLC, and we also gratefully acknowledge our program partners, Navigate Maternity, A Light After Nine, Chi Eta Phi Sorority, Herd App, and the Hive Impact Fund. Last, we extend our sincere thanks to Your Village Studio for their outstanding technical and administrative support. Together, these organizations help strengthen education, connection, and innovation in support of safer births now. We have a rich lineup of sessions scheduled throughout the conference, and we invite you to keep engaging with us. Please invite the conference website. Please visit the conference website to explore what's ahead and make plans to join the sessions that speak to you the most. We encourage you to continue the conversation on social media using hashtag #SaferBirthsNow. Follow Safer Births Now um, on social media for updates, resources, and upcoming events. Thank you again.